Honestly, I know the slow burn behind your forehead, the hiss of static you carry from sunrise to the last exhausted scroll after midnight. The world keeps humming at you, louder than your own pulse, until the difference between inner voice and outer noise becomes a blur. You flip through headlines, video bites, glowing squares of someone else's breakfast and someone else's outrage. Every swipe feels like progress, a minor burst of, I am still in the loop, yet your chest sits hollow, as if the loop keeps tightening while your sense of self keeps thinning. There is a story you keep telling yourself. I am informed, therefore I exist. It sounds reasonable. You jump between news alerts, inbox pings, a half-watched documentary that whispers about meaning while you answer another message. On paper, you are more connected than any generation before, but inside spreads an unnameable fatigue, a murmur that says, connection without depth is starvation dressed as a feast. The mind eats, but never digests, and the body registers it as a kind of low-grade panic. Picture it. You open a feed to relax and feel an immediate undertow. A river of other minds floods the screen. Opinions, crises, triumphs measured in likes, yet not one drop quenches what you truly thirst for. You scroll farther, but the current moves faster, the water thick with other people's urgency. Soon the banks disappear, and you float in an endless delta of borrowed thoughts, seeing everything, touching nothing. You reach for more, convinced the next post might anchor you, but every pixel pulls you another inch from your own shoreline. You are not broken. You are living in architecture designed to mine attention the way drills mine oil. A trillion-dollar engine feeds you novelty, not wisdom, because novelty buys more time online. The engine knows that when silence arrives, your questions grow teeth. It knows that when you pause, you might feel that quiet ache that says, this is not living. So the system fills every pause with another clip, another spark, another reminder that distraction is easier than introspection. You already sense it. Meetings blur, evenings vanish, books sit half-read on the nightstand. Your memory fractures into shards of trivia. You attempt to rest, but the mind flickers even with your eyes closed, replaying a carousel of unfinished stimuli. The irony stings. The same screens that promise to free your time now devour it. Yet the real cost is not hours, it is identity. When attention scatters across 1,000 fragments, the central thread that holds you together frays. Here is the claim, laid bare: screens, phones, tablets, televisions, the glowing rectangles at every checkout line do not merely steal minutes. They chip away at the spacious interior where thought becomes insight and feeling becomes meaning. They offer the illusion of omnipresence while erasing the slow inner processes that craft purpose. The more hours you trade for curated flashes of other lives, the less blood reaches the living heart of your own. You are not alone in this. The numbness you hide behind small talk exists in countless pockets and living rooms. The restless tapping of legs during a meeting, the sudden blank when someone asks, "What do you really want?" These are symptoms of the same oversaturated nervous system. They signal a self-push to the margins by constant stimulation, a self-whispering from the corner, waiting to be heard again. If I can offer one breath of relief, it is this: nothing is wrong with your willpower. You have not failed some private test of discipline. You are swimming in water engineered to feel indispensable. Most maps you have been given praise productivity apps and tighter schedules, as if the cure for overstimulation is better efficiency at ingesting it. The deeper remedy begins elsewhere. By the end of this video, you will understand why the journey back to yourself starts not with downloading a new tool, but with stepping away from the digital whirlpool entirely. You will see that silence is not an absence, but a portal, and that beyond the hum of notifications, there waits a voice you have not heard clearly in years. Keep listening, The surface noise grows loudest right before the break in the storm, and together we are about to cross that threshold. If we are honest, the first illusion slides into our minds so quietly that we mistake it for common sense. The screens promise knowledge and growth. Every glow declares, stay informed, stay ahead, become better. You sit in a cafe, phone face up beside the mug, and call it multitasking. A headline flashes about a distant election, another about a scientific breakthrough, another about the latest scandal. Each headline whispers, "You are growing wiser simply by seeing me." The mind nods along, convinced that exposure equals integration. Yet by nightfall, the same mind struggles to recall a single layered idea that changed the texture of thought. Instead, there lingers only a faint aftertaste of agitation, like trying to remember the plot of a dream already dissolving at dawn. I will tell you what most wellness blogs do not admit. Information without digestion fragments attention into glittering dust. You read 100 headlines, perhaps even 1,000 words here and a handful of statistics there, but none find the oxygen of reflection. They jostle for space until they cancel one another out, leaving behind a low hum of unfinished meaning. The brain, built for pattern and story, flinches under the constant hail of unrelated data. It races to close every open loop yet never manages, because each swipe births 10 new loops. This is not evolution. It is informational tinnitus, a ringing you carry even into sleep. Imagine a single day in which every alert, every banner, every sponsored insight demanded you pause, breathe, and translate it into lived understanding. The day would collapse under its own weight. That burden does not disappear when you ignore it. It disperses inside your nervous system as background dread, the sense that something important has slipped through the cracks, though you cannot name what. The screens did not gift you knowledge. They loaded your mental desktop with files you never asked for and then crashed the program that sorts them. Let me name the second illusion with the calm clarity it deserves. I control my time, you insist while glancing at the clock on the lock screen. The calendar app bristles with color-coded blocks, each promising mastery over minutes. You feel productive because you can schedule life to the quarter hour and because the device chirps to remind you when to shift focus. On paper, this appears like sovereignty. In practice, the true ruler sits invisible in the code. Algorithms learn not only what grabs your gaze, but at which angle, under which lighting, and for how long before boredom blooms. They study hesitation like biologists study cell division. They know the precise flavor of content that nicks your curiosity just enough to open yet another tab. You say that you decide when to log in, yet the body twitches toward the notification before thought finishes forming. A sound, a vibration, a subtle pulse of color activates an old survival circuit that once kept your ancestors alive in the forest. Now it keeps the revenue stream alive for corporations that trade hits of novelty the way street vendors trade sugared drinks. You tell yourself you can quit any time, but the system does not rely on discipline. It relies on pattern recognition and anticipatory reward. It whispers the name of your longing and then sells you an imitation shaped to fit. There is no condemnation in these words. You are not weak. You are exquisitely human. The mechanisms arrayed against your freedom were engineered over decades by teams who understand the lizard, the limbic, and the logical layers of the brain. They tuned pigments to trigger microsaccades in your eyes, timed the scroll friction so that each upward motion feels effortless, yet infinitely repeatable, calibrated fonts to mimic familiarity and safety. Resistance requires more than will. It requires seeing the stagecraft while the performance continues, a feat akin to spotting the magician's sleight of hand while your heart still thrills at the illusion. Now the third illusion steps forward, wearing the friendliest mask of all. I relax when I scroll. After a day of obligations, the soft glow feels like a warm bath, an easy slide into passive consumption. You sink into the couch, thumbs conducting the endless orchestra of tiles and thumbnails, certain that this is downtime. The body disagrees. The sympathetic nervous system, responsible for vigilance, fires each time the content shifts unpredictably. Microbursts of adrenaline spike whenever a dramatic headline appears or an unexpected image rolls into view. The pupils dilate to absorb more detail. The neck muscles tense in subtle readiness. Cortisol drips its ancient warning that change may equal threat. True rest requires a descent from hypervigilance into parasympathetic repair, a state screens almost never permit. Even soothing videos rely on perpetual novelty to hold you. The moment calm begins to settle, the algorithm detects declining engagement and offers a louder stimulus to reel you back. Over time, the baseline of arousal creeps upward. What once felt exciting now feels normal, and what once felt normal now feels dull. The result is not restoration, but a chronic depletion masked as entertainment. You rise from the couch and wonder why muscles ache, as though you ran a silent marathon. In truth, you did. The mind sprinted through a labyrinth of stimuli without ever reaching the center. Pause with me here. Breathe. Notice the impulse to hurry, to skim, to hunt for the next section. That twitch is evidence. The architecture has conditioned you to anticipate the jump cut. The discomfort of stillness proves how seldom we inhabit it. You are not to blame. The design exploits evolutionary wiring older than written language. It monetizes the very circuits that once helped you spot predators in the tall grass. The hacker is whispering inside the code, not inside your character. Yet there is a darker consequence, and this is the spine of our tension. Each moment you outsource presence to screens, a small portion of the narrative thread that weaves your identity thins. Memory consolidates during contemplative pauses, meaning crystallizes during boredom. Desire clarifies when competing signals fade. Remove the gaps and the psyche becomes a collage of half-formed impressions, gorgeous in color, yet fragile in cohesion. The more screens, the more vivid the fragments, and the less substance they contain. Eventually, the collage fractures, and the self finds fewer solid surfaces on which to stand. Most psychologists will not tell you this in plain speech. They speak of attention spans and dopamine circuits, which is accurate but incomplete. The core loss is existential. When you cannot locate a steady witness inside your own mind, the world's noise dictates your values by default. Advertising becomes ethics, trending outrage becomes moral compass, virality replaces intimacy. You wake feeling ghostly, as though living inside a story drafted by strangers. You try harder, consume more, adjust settings, install focus apps, purchase digital detox programs that arrive as yet another push notification. The cycle repeats because the remedy mimics the poison. I will not leave you here without comfort. Let this truth land gently. You did nothing wrong. You stepped into an era still sprinting faster than any single nervous system can track. The social contract did not update in time to protect the delicate machinery of the mind. You reacted as any adaptable organism would. You survived. Now survival no longer satisfies. You hunger for depth, for the texture of interior silence, for conversations that do not evaporate when the screen locks. That hunger is sane. It signals the readiness to reclaim what distraction borrowed. Hold on to this hunger. Let it sharpen rather than depress you. There is a way back, and it begins with the next breath, the simplest motion the algorithm cannot monetize. In a moment, we will step through concrete practices, yet first stay with the tension, because it fuels the decision to change. Remember the whisper at the edge of awareness. The truly frightening cost is not measured in wasted evenings, but in the gradual erosion of the eye that speaks when no one watches. There is something even more unsettling. and its shape will come into full view as we proceed. The fewer cracks we allow in the digital wall, the less room remains for the sovereign voice within. Here lies the cliffhanger spoken plain. The screens seem to steal hours. In reality, they carve away pieces of personhood. They hollow the ground beneath memory, intention, originality. When that ground thins too far, the self risks falling through into a haze where every opinion feels borrowed and every dream feels secondhand. The next segment exposes exactly how this erosion happens at the level of archetype and neurochemistry. It is not theory, it is the silent undertow already tugging at your ankles each time the device glows in the dark room. Keep listening. The storm on the surface is only the prelude to what churns below. You reach a point where the pattern grows painfully clear. Every headline and hot take, every neon badge nudging the corner of your eye, tells you that awareness is a product you can own. Spend enough minutes on the timeline and you become knowledgeable, cultured, well-rounded. The surface story feels comforting. Underneath, a quieter narrative unfolds. Attention splits again, then splinters into slivers too thin to hold personal meaning. The voice that once whispered reflective thoughts retreats, unsure whether it is still welcome. The inner council chamber empties out, chairs overturned, because conversation needs unbroken space and the space has filled with noise. An ancient rhythm lives in the mind. It cycles between taking in impressions and setting them down for the night, the way a cook stores ingredients before turning them into nourishment. When impressions flood in without respite, the cook never lights the stove. Raw data piles up until freshness fades. Memory turns sour. Creativity loses its scent. Emotional clarity sits forgotten at the back of the mental pantry. You notice the subtle effects first. Sentences trail off mid-thought. Names evaporate. A sense of self, once thick and steady, feels translucent. Soon even the effects lose definition, because fog cannot see its own edges. I speak this aloud so the fog begins to thin. Fragmented attention erases the corridors where inner dialogue once strolled. The absence feels like silence at first. Lean closer, and you discover it is not silence at all, but a vacant hum. The hum says, keep scrolling. The hum says, you have no time to think. The hum devours reflection, the very act that turns experience into personal truth. Without reflection, you remain conscious in a technical sense, yet unconscious of the person inhabiting that consciousness. A subtle exile takes place. You remain present, yet do not belong to yourself. Listen carefully, because this is the hinge on which the entire journey swings. Consciousness is not the sum of what you read, watch, or hear. Consciousness is the living digestion of those impressions, the quiet chemistry that transforms raw stimulation into insight, value, direction. Remove pause and digestion halts. Remove quiet and meaning starves. The subject dissolves. You still move through days, answer messages, present polite smiles, but the pilot light inside flickers low. If these words find resonance within you, subscribe to the channel. That single gesture ensures that more people will hear the truth obscured beneath layers of polished distraction. It widens the circle of minds willing to reclaim their own depth. Stay with me. Do not let the attention slide elsewhere, because what follows cuts closer to bone. Each time you open a feed, the images pour in like bright shards of stained glass. Beautiful fragments, yes, yet fragments remain shards until someone assembles them into a window. Assembly demands stillness, gentle focus, hands free of interruption. The algorithm supplies color without blueprint. You end up holding a handful of glitter with no story to cast light through it. Neuroscience describes this as stimulus saturation. Depth psychologists describe it as archetypal overload. Both point to the same wound, A threshold exists where novelty becomes noise, and the psyche treats noise as threat. The nervous system rallies resources to meet that threat, spikes cortisol, narrows the aperture of perception to manage survival. Long term, the body adapts by staying half ready for battle at all times. Rest slips from deep delta waves into restless drift. Dreams lose narrative and become static. You wake fatigued, already behind an avalanche of updates you never asked for. That exhaustion tricks you into craving more stimulation to stay alert. You reach for another reel, another article, another targeted recommendation. The wheel spins faster. Each spin files away a thin slice of agency. This is not hyperbole. Agency requires choice, and real choice demands enough mental quiet to weigh outcomes. A roaring environment steals that quiet. Therefore, choice grows reactive, reflexive, almost scripted. People speak of zombie scrolling with a grin, unaware the metaphor contains more truth than humor. Inside the labyrinth of constant input, an ancient psychological structure withers, the mythopoetic imagination. This faculty once helped humanity weave symbolic meaning from outer events, turning personal struggle into story that heals. It unfolds slowly, in candlelit gaps, in the hush after labor, in lineages of oral lore shared beside crackling fire. Translate that scene into modern living, and the fire becomes the soft glow of a single conscious breath. The hush becomes intentional pause. The story becomes the inner monologue that asks not what happened, but what it means. Strip away the pause, and the mythopoetic function collapses. Events remain events. They never integrate into cohesive narrative. The self that relied on narrative for continuity frays. Depth psychology calls this fragmentation of ego. Neuroscience calls it disrupted default mode network. Philosophy calls it loss of subjectivity. Different tongues, same crisis. The common cure passes through a door marked stillness. Stillness is not inert. It is the fertile soil where digestion completes. In stillness, the mind chews, swallows, and finally absorbs the minerals of experience. In stillness, a headline about global turmoil might translate into compassion. A film scene might crystallize into a personal ethic. A passing comment from a friend might reveal a hidden longing. Without stillness, the nutrients wash away. Modern culture mistakes stillness for wasted opportunity. Productivity slogans worship momentum, and marketing frames each idle minute as a gap where another app might bloom. Yet your interior architecture refuses to rewrite its ancient code. It waits patiently for a silence that seldom arrives. When silence does appear, often by accident, during an elevator ride with no signal, a power outage, a restless night, the psyche releases a backlog of impressions all at once. Thoughts race, emotions surge, random memories flicker. Many interpret this surge as anxiety. They reach for the device to smother it again. In truth, it is digestion finally resuming, albeit chaotically after long starvation. The cultural moment labels this chaos attention deficit. That diagnosis holds validity, but risks missing context. Concentration cannot thrive in perpetual emergency. The collective environment functions as continuous siren. The siren floods the senses. Concentration, a delicate instrument, buckles under the wave. Restoration begins not with self-discipline alone, but with strategic refusal. Refuse the constant push toward stimulus. Refuse the myth that more input equals more worth. Refuse the guilt that surfaces when you choose deep over fast. Pause now. Feel the muscle memory of reaching for another window. Notice how subtle the compulsion feels, like a phantom limb trembling. The impulse proves the depth of conditioning. Recognize it without judgment. Curiosity seeks novelty by design, yet curiosity also seeks coherence, and coherence only arises when novelty rests long enough to form pattern. Give novelty that rest, and it transforms into wisdom. Deny rest, and it metastasizes into white noise. You might wonder how long of a pause is enough to restart digestion. The mind operates less like a microwave and more like a fireplace. A spark ignites quickly, but sustained warmth requires patient tending. 15 conscious breaths, a short walk, a handwritten reflection, all rekindle embers. Over time, embers merge into steady flame. The flame illuminates corners previously hidden beneath habitual glare. You begin noticing subtle preferences, dormant dreams, unresolved grief. These discoveries unsettle at first. Discomfort signals growth, the way muscle aches after dormant tissue returns to use. The screen culture sells convenience above discomfort. It trains reflexes to equate friction with flaw. Yet friction within attentive silence polishes raw awareness into clarity. Each moment of resistance turned inward reveals texture. Texture yields direction. Direction clears the fog. Clear sight fuels decisions aligned with authenticity rather than algorithmic suggestion. Authentic action restores agency, which nourishes selfhood, closing the loop that fragmentation once tore open. Think back to the evening scroll that left you restless. Replace it, even for a trial period, with a corridor of unhurried thought. Allow a single article rather than a dozen headlines. Print it, mark the margins, let questions arise and settle into statements. The algebra of selfhood begins there. Simplify input, deepen processing, integrate meaning. These steps mirror digestive health in the gut, another ecosystem that thrives on balanced pacing and whole ingredients. Many therapists treat overload through mindfulness apps running on the same devices that orchestrate distraction. The irony does not escape you now. Tools can aid if used within deliberate boundaries, yet boundaries themselves must originate beyond the reach of the tool. A pause enforced by hardware remains fragile. A pause chosen by conviction roots deeper, holds longer. Conviction sprouts when understanding matures. Understanding feels alive at this instant because the narrative has slowed enough for you to inhabit it. Remember the call you heeded moments ago. Subscribe if resonance stirred. That act is not trivial. It signals willingness to anchor within a community dedicated to depth over spectacle. It informs the engines of visibility that substance still matters. Each new subscriber tilts the algorithm slightly toward content that heals rather than hypes. Collective choice rewires collective environment, albeit gradually. Your singular click carries weight precisely because the designers expected apathy, not awake intention. We stand at a threshold. Behind us sprawls the neon carnival of endless input. Ahead stretches a path of deliberate sense-making. The carnival will continue to broadcast, bright and insistent. You need not demolish it. You only need to reclaim sovereign dialogue with yourself. The dialogue begins when you grant time for silent digestion. From that digestion arises thought sturdy enough to guide action, memory vivid enough to ground identity, purpose resilient enough to outshine the next trending controversy. In the segments ahead, we will break silence into practical rituals, test them against the inertia of habit, and examine the deeper psychological layers, archetypes, and complexes that screens exploit when unchecked. The terrain becomes more challenging, yet the promise grows richer. Pauses lengthen into vistas. Vistas reveal choice. Choice awakens the author seated inside your chest, pen poised above the unwritten pages. The unwritten pages wait for no one, yet they will receive you the moment you arrive. Stay engaged. The thread of meaning holds steady now, its fibers stronger with each conscious breath. Something more intimate than data is about to surface, and it thrives only in the kind of attention you are reclaiming right this moment. The journey turns inward, and even the hum begins to recede. You already sense the tug before the screen even lights up. A phantom vibration appears in your palm, a brief shimmer of maybe there is something new, and the mind lurches forward to catch the next pulse of reward. That pulse is microscopic, a drizzle of dopamine so quick that the conscious layer barely notices. The body, however, registers it as promise fulfilled. The promise says relief is one tap away, relief from a mute unease that hovers just outside awareness. Each burst feels harmless, even productive, yet a slow erosion begins. Every micro-reward slices a sliver off the long arc of focus, and after enough slices, nothing substantial remains for sustained thought. Dopamine was never designed to fire this frequently. In the ancestral world, it arrived like a bell after genuine discovery, reinforcing learning and endurance. The current landscape assaults the same circuit with a confetti cannon. Microdoses encourage the brain to expect novelty every few breaths. When novelty fails to appear, a vague discomfort rises, urging you to refresh, scroll, peek. Attention splits. The front line of consciousness must constantly triage between the chore at hand and the possibility of a brighter pixel elsewhere. Fragmentation becomes the default state, and focus, that once familiar stillness, feels foreign, even unsafe. Self-esteem quietly melts under the spray of endless comparison. Each timeline supplies curated victories of distant acquaintances, influences, strangers. The primal mind absorbs those polished fragments as factual rankings. It counts likes, like ancient tribes counted shells, as if external markers equate to internal worth. A flicker of envy surfaces, then shame for feeling envy, then another scroll to numb the shame. Round and round. Over time, the nervous system links self-valuation to the next external nod. Personal achievements grow dull beside the neon scoreboard. Identity reduces to the performance of identity, while the stable sense of inherent value fades. Carl Jung described the shadow as the sum of traits a person or culture refuses to acknowledge. Screens animate that collective shadow in real time. The feed parades outrage, ridicule, conspicuous hunger for status. Each swipe reveals a shard of what society denies in daylight. Instead of integrating those elements, the psyche pushes them farther away by spiraling into passive observation. We hide in the noise from the pain of quiet self-encounter. The greater the dread of meeting the buried self, the denser the wall of glowing rectangles erected around us. The screens act like bright torches held outward, so the holder never sees what looms behind. Neuroscience offers a simpler lens. Continuous stimulation resets the brain's baseline of excitement. Picture a volume knob forever turned upward, leaving no silent channel where deep processing can occur. The prefrontal cortex, headquarters of planning and moral reasoning, fatigues from rapid task switching. The hippocampus, gatekeeper of memory, struggles to encode experience because consolidation requires pauses. Even the default mode network, the circuit that knits past, present, and future into coherent autobiography, loses rhythmic cohesion. External signals override the internal musicians, and the symphony collapses into static. A paradox hardens at the core. People approach screens seeking meaning, community, direction. Yet meaning demands digestion. Community demands presence. Direction demands a compass, not spun by algorithmic gusts. The device promises clarity, but scatters the pieces required to build clarity. It becomes possible to know headlines from distant continents while remaining ignorant of the motive behind the next personal choice. Knowledge expands laterally and thins vertically until it resembles a lake only a finger deep. The tension rises toward its inevitable reveal, and here rests the most painful truth. The more screens surround you, the less self remains. Less time, less energy, and, most severe, a diminishing of the inner witness who once guided all other resources. What fades is not mere productivity, but the felt continuity that says, I am here, I persist, I matter beyond my latest data point. This erosion proceeds silently, masked by constant novelty, until one evening the reflection staring back from dark glass appears oddly unfamiliar. Yet recognition seeds possibility. Seeing the cycle breaks its spell. Awareness names the quick dopamine loop and feels its lure without surrender. Awareness recognizes the borrowed metrics of self-worth and gently returns them to sender. Awareness catches the collective shadow on parade and chooses dialogue over denial. Stillness re-enters the neural circuitry like rain soaking cracked ground. Concentration lengthens minute by minute, day by day, until a single sustained breath feels natural again. The journey deeper begins as the next section takes shape. We will shift from diagnosis to practice, from theory to concrete moves that open distance between you and the machine built to own your gaze. Momentum already tilts in your favor because knowledge, once integrated, turns attention into an instrument rather than prey. The path grows demanding, yet every step returns a fragment of the self you feared was lost. Take a slow breath and imagine an entire hour with no screen speaking your name. The idea sounds luxurious on the surface, yet deep in the gut, it can spark a flicker of alarm. That alarm is proof of concept. When the nervous system has lived on a steady drip of stimulus, true stillness feels like stepping from neon into midnight. The pupils dilate, the inner ear strains, and every suppressed whisper of emotion finally raises its hand. This is exactly why the first practical step must be radical in its simplicity. One solid hour of deliberate silence every single day. No phone, no podcast, no background show keeping you company. Only the steady pulse of real time and the body that carries you through it. Choose any hour that will not unravel your obligations. Early light before the household stirs. A lunch break spent outside beneath unnoticed branches. The last stretch of evening while city lights hum far away. Create a repeating appointment with yourself, spoken aloud, if it helps cement the promise. You are not removing stimulation in order to deprive pleasure. You are clearing a field for deep roots to reclaim soil. During that hour, boredom will likely pace the perimeter. Let it pace. Boredom is not an enemy. Boredom is the calloused hand that knocks on the cellar where imagination has waited in the dark. With each minute you remain, the cellar door inches open. Memories you half erased begin to breathe. Unresolved feelings shift their weight, no longer smothered by the next notification. Attention gathers back into a single beam instead of scattered sparks. The brain moves from emergency mode into the slow frequencies where insight condenses like dew. Many people stumble here because silence brings the shadow into sharper relief. Old criticism or grief may surface, and the instinct is to reach for noise. Understand that this discomfort is a compass pointing toward integration. The psyche presents what it is ready to metabolize once conditions allow. Treat each rising sensation as a guest who brings a message. Host the guest kindly. Label the feeling in plain language. You can say, "This is impatience," or "This is shame," or "This is fear, I might be wasting time." Naming emotion shifts it from predator to participant. The act of naming recruits the prefrontal cortex, soothing the limbic alarm. Over days and weeks, the hour of silence stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like home ground. The second practice rewires the hand that reflexively scrolls. Replace the motion of infinite feed with the weight of a paper page. A printed book anchors attention through texture and fragrance and the faint rustle that screens cannot imitate. Select any genre that genuinely stirs curiosity. Biography, philosophy, even an old thriller rescued from a sidewalk library. The type of content matters less than the sense of tactile engagement. When eyes glide across ink, the absence of pop-up advert and hyperlink allows comprehension to settle. Neural circuitry that once mastered sustained reading can spark back to life quicker than you expect because the architecture never vanished. It only grew dormant beneath constant interruption. Set a modest aim at first, a single chapter each evening before sleep. Mark margins with pencil to keep the mind actively chewing. When the urge to check the phone prickles, notice it as a muscle memory, then let the prickling pass like distant thunder. Over weeks, your reading stamina will stretch, comprehension will grow nuanced again. The subtle pleasure of absorbing layered ideas will rival the quick hit of novelty, and eventually exceed it. This quiet triumph feeds authentic self-esteem because it is self-generated. You prove to the deepest circuits that value does not depend on external applause. You reclaim the ability to hold a long arc of thought from premise to conclusion, a skill essential for any meaningful pursuit. Third comes the practice of intentional screenless windows peppered through the day. Think of them as pressure release valves for the attentional system. 5 minutes after each online meeting to stare at a distant rooftop or to feel the current of breath inside ribs. 10 minutes mid-afternoon to walk a perimeter of grass, letting peripheral vision widen again. A device switched off during the first forkful of every meal so that taste can fully register. These pockets of emptiness function like commas in a sentence, letting meaning assemble between bursts of words. Without commas, even the most beautiful paragraph devolves into frantic noise. Here is the hidden power of these windows. By breaking constant stimulation into discernible chapters, you teach the brain to exit and enter focus states on command rather than being yanked around by algorithmic scheduling. You become the conductor who signals when the orchestra plays and when it rests. Over time, the mind learns that intensity will be followed by recovery, so it can devote full resources to the task at hand without covertly scanning for exit ramps. Productivity rises as a side effect, but the deeper benefit is a felt continuity of self. Each pause is like tapping the home button on inner awareness, confirming that you are still the one steering. Beneath these tools runs the more challenging terrain of shadow work. Silence scares many not simply because it is empty, but because it is fertile. What you avoided blooms there. Childhood criticism that carved deep grooves, stalled grief for relationships that ended before closure, anger at unspoken compromises made to fit someone else's script. When such material surfaces, the ordinary habit is flight. Unlock the phone, drown the spark. The antidote is radical hospitality. You tell the arising discomfort, "I expected you," stay as long as needed. Then breathe into the physical sensation rather than the story swirling around it. Notice if the heartbeat quickens, if the jaw tightens, if breath rides high in the chest. Anchor in the body. The body processes emotion with slow chemical waves that require presence more than explanation. Acceptance does not mean endorsement of pain. Acceptance means ending the war against your own nervous system. Most psychic fatigue stems not from raw emotion, but from the energy spent barricading it. When the barrier drops, stored charge dissipates. You may cry, tremble, laugh without logical trigger. These events are evidence of the limbic brain releasing long-held static. After the wave passes, a space opens inside that no external content can manufacture. Creativity visits here. Intuition stretches. Compassion for others expands because the self has survived its own depths. At this point, the practices converge. Hourly silence builds tolerance for solitude. Reading long-form rebuilds cognitive endurance. Micro windows recalibrate the stress response. Shadow work turns discomfort into fuel. Together, they create a feedback loop, opposite to the screen addiction spiral. Instead of fragmented attention chasing micro rewards, you experience integrated attention, generating macro reward. Steady clarity, renewed vitality, grounded confidence not tethered to another person's approval. Consider this a soft dare spoken from one equal to another. Live a single rotation of the earth without the endless hum. Turn off non-essential notifications at dawn. Charge the device in a distant room. Carry a slim paperback where the phone once lived in your pocket. Walk, eat, converse, and rest with no glowing intermediary. You will likely meet fidgeting ghosts for the first few hours. Then, as dusk leans in, you may notice birdsong you never registered on your own block, or detect the scent of rain traveling through summer air. Most striking, you will start to hear a voice that sounds familiar, yet almost forgotten. That voice rolls out thoughts in complete sentences, sometimes even in paragraphs. It is your own, and it never stopped speaking. It only needed the bandwidth to break through. Let the experiment conclude only when night settles and the last lamp clicks off. As you lie in darkness, watch how memory replays the day without digital highlights dominating the reel. The mind feels roomier. The heart thrums with a steadier cadence. Sleep tends to drop like warm stone into deep water, untroubled by phantom pings. When dawn returns, you will know something changed, because the urge to reach for the phone will still exist, but alongside it stands a newly reclaimed choice. You feel the fork in the road as palpable sensation. One path leads back to the hypnotic scroll, the other leads toward the book, the walk, the conversation face to face. That fork is agency resurrected. If you need numbers, collect inner data. Count breaths that travel the full length of the torso. Count footsteps that feel grounded rather than rushed. Count evenings that end with a page corner folded instead of an exhausted thumb. Let those counts replace metrics sold by social software. They track the restoration of personhood instead of the performance of profile. A culture saturated with velocity calls these practices slow. Slow is simply a synonym for alive enough to notice nuance. In nuance, solutions germinate. In nuance, bonds thicken. In nuance, the mythopoetic imagination sets up its easel and paints the story you alone were born to tell. Technology can still assist that story, once it takes its rightful seat as servant rather than master. The rituals above train the psyche to keep that hierarchy intact. You stand at the doorway of a quieter interior mansion, keys in hand. Take the dare. One single day minus the ceaseless noise will begin returning your voice. One single hour of silence every day thereafter will deepen the timbre. One single chapter of a printed book will stretch the lung capacity of thought. One repeated choice to greet discomfort instead of outrun, it will turn fear into fluent self-knowledge. And self-knowledge, unlike any algorithm, will never sell you to the highest bidder. Screens are not the enemy. The true enemy is our willingness to dissolve inside them. The brighter the glow, the easier it becomes to forget that the glow emanates from something we hold, not from who we are. The math is simple and brutal. The more screens, the less self. Yet the simplicity hides an invitation. You can reclaim yourself. All it asks is that you choose to hear the silence that waits beneath the static. Imagine standing at the shoreline on a moonless night. The tide moves with tidal patience, each wave a whisper older than any technology. Far inland, cities pulse in synchronized flashes. Somewhere inside those lights, your devices hum, stacking new notifications even while you sleep. Between the tide and the towers stretches a field of darkness so quiet it almost shivers. Step into that darkness for a breath, and you feel an intimate presence stirring. It is the unfragmented version of you, listening, ready. Today you have traveled through the circuitry of dependence and out the other side. You have learned how quick sparks of dopamine bend attention until it forgets how to rest. You have seen that every accelerated swipe sells a hollow promise, meaning without digestion. You have traced the arc of self-esteem eroding under constant comparison and you have walked the shadowed corridors where unspoken fears hide behind glowing walls. At each turn, the same pattern emerged. Noise distracts, silence reveals, distraction shrinks you, attention reassembled expands you. Now the journey pauses at a fork no algorithm can choose on your behalf. To the left lies the familiar scroll, comforting in its rhythm, safe in its predictability. To the right lies unclaimed quiet. The quiet may feel empty at first, yet emptiness is merely space not yet filled with your own voice. Walk that direction, and the old phantom craving will follow for a while, pleading for a hit of novelty. Continue anyway. The craving loses volume the moment it realizes you are feeding on something richer. Return to the shoreline image. Waves continue their ancient work, whether or not you acknowledge them. The same is true of the inner tide. Even while your attention scattered, depth continued its slow cycle beneath the surface. When you remove constant stimulus, that depth rises through the layers, carrying memories you long buried, insights you half glimpsed, tenderness you never quite allowed to bloom. The first swell may feel messy, perhaps even painful. It is not chaos, it is reconstitution. Pieces meant to belong together are reuniting. Screens are tools, nothing more, nothing less. In the hands of an unconscious mind, they become wardens, locking awareness inside a cell shimmering with faux freedom. In the hands of a conscious mind, they revert to their true status. Servants. They can compile research for a book you decide to write in the morning calm, or deliver music for a walk that ends in fresh pages of untangled thought. They can connect you to voices that echo your deepest questions, or let you share the harvest of your own answers with those still searching. The difference is ownership of attention. When you sit in the driver's seat, technology lengthens your reach without shortening your soul. Ownership begins with a boundary no one else will draw. It might look like an hour without any moving pixels, or a dinner table free from surveillance of likes, or a dawn when your phone waits on the other side of a closed door while you walk barefoot through grass wet with dew. Each boundary whispers the same sentence: I value my life force more than the spectacle vying for it. Whisper that sentence often enough, and it becomes a pulse the body recognizes. Over time, the pulse reforms your habits at the level of reflex. Reaching for the device loses urgency because the well inside is no longer dry. Remember the shadow you met in stillness. It holds energy once tied up in evasion. When the evasion stops, the energy returns. You may notice restless urges transmuting into creative sparks, daydreams turning into blueprints, anger refining into clear boundaries spoken without apology. You have not become someone else. You have simply stepped back into the pilot seat. The gauges read almost full again. The compass needle, long jittery from overexposure, settles toward a true north that exists beyond trending noise. Screens are not the enemy. The enemy is our readiness to blur into them. The cost of blurring is not measured only in lost minutes or drained batteries. The cost is the shrinking of the personal gravity that once grounded every decision. When that gravity fades, existence tilts toward whichever headline shouts loudest. Recover the gravity, and the tilt reverses. Noise still exists, yet it orbits around you instead of the other way around. If you recognize your own reflection in these words, write in the comments, I am done running from pain. We will see how many here are ready for truth. Let the comment section become a map of voices who choose depth over distraction, a living reminder that none of us walks this road in isolation. The closing whisper remains deliberately unfinished. This is only the beginning. Far beneath the hush, you reclaimed tonight waits an entire architecture of inner rooms unexplored, doors unopened, windows overlooking landscapes you have yet to name. Ahead lies work both challenging and luminous, and beyond that waits something even deeper. The story continues. Further still, further always. Dusk recedes, the moon climbs, and your next step into silence is already drawing breath.